Tashtalek, this is Tenzin Chimi and welcome to In Conversation with Tibet TV. For today's episode, we have with us Michael van Walt, the Executive President of Kreddha, a conflict resolution organization, and a former Secretary General of the Organization of Unrepresented Nations and Peoples. He has been awarded a knighthood by the Dutch government in recognition of his lifelong dedication and commendable achievements in support of the unrepresented and oppressed nations and peoples of the world. Today we're going to talk about his new book, Tibet Brief 2020, that was recently released. Tashtalek Michael.
Tashtalek.
Michael,
thank you very much for inviting me, Tenzin.
This is your second book on Tibet and the history and political status of Tibet. Your first book was published in the year 1987. What is different about this book? What is new about this book that might encourage our viewers to read it?
This book is different from anything that I have written or that has been written so far in Tibet. First, I think because it's specifically and systematically responds to and debunks every aspect of the Chinese claim to sovereignty over Tibet, both historically and today. I've been told the book is actually quite readable. It's accessible. Secondly, we discovered, the co-author and myself, Mick Bolchis and myself, we discovered an important flaw in how inner and East Asian historical relations are normally presented. And we see that it was necessary to correct that. So our analysis in the book, Tibet Brief 2020, is based on recognizing the equal importance of all three legal orders that were in place in Asia up until around 1912. The Mongol Jinggisid order, the Sinic Confucian order, and the Tibetan Buddhist one. And we believe that you can't properly understand historical Asia without applying the norms of all these three orders to those relations. And this has not been done before. Most scholars look at Asian relations and Tibet's place in Asia from a Sinocentric point of view. And of course, Tibetologists tend to look at Tibet and its relations mostly from the Tibetan Buddhist point of view. So our new approach is really key to understanding why Beijing's claim that Tibet has always been a part of China is false and how its narrative is misleading.
Right. And Tibet Brief 2020 is directed towards international community. You're asking the governments to change their Tibet-China policy and in order to give Sino-Tibetan negotiations a chance. What is your number one recommendation for Tibetan diplomats when they meet international, the foreign government officials and parliamentarians?
My number one recommendation would be that they persuade government officials and parliamentarians that the Sino-Tibetan conflict is not China's internal affair, but that it's an international conflict, which the international community has a responsibility and legal obligation to help resolve. I would recommend that Tibetan diplomats, actually, that all Tibetans who engage with foreign decision makers or opinion makers and those who write or broadcast, like yourselves, refer to the Sino-Tibetan conflict as an international conflict and to Tibet as an occupied country, and not use euphemistic, non-committal, or meaningless expressions like the Tibet issue. I would also recommend that they always refer to Tibetans as a people, never as a minority, because these kind of language choices are truly important. They have both legal and political consequences. The other thing is, currently most non-Tibetans are not aware that Tibet is truly an occupied country. The invasion and occupation took place such a long time ago, and China has been very successful at propagating its false narrative by which Tibet has always been a part of China, and Tibetans are just one of China's minorities. Many people nowadays take this for granted and don't question this narrative, even though it's not correct, because Tibet has never been a part of China. It was independent for almost 4 decades before the Chinese troops invaded it. So these are all really very important findings of the book. And I can't really overstate how essential I think it is for the world to know this.
Right. As you just talked about Tibet's past, in your book, you emphasize on history, making a point that Tibet's political and historical status vis-a-vis China is a key factor in determining whether China has the right to rule Tibet today. Some might even suggest that we should not focus on past, rather focus on the present and future. So don't you think that emphasizing Tibet's history would anger China and lead to refusal from their side to negotiate with us? What is the importance of emphasizing Tibet's past independent status?
I would argue that that the opposite is true in terms of your question, whether we shouldn't be looking in the past and really only focusing on today and the future. Of course, we must focus on the current situation, and we must look to the future and focus on that as well. But and it's also true, as you say, that contradicting the Chinese on their narrative regarding Tibet makes them angry. But remember, Beijing is not negotiating with Tibetans now either. And I believe it is precisely because China's leaders don't feel the need to negotiate. I'm convinced that as long as the Chinese get away with framing the conflict as an internal matter, or even as a personal matter between their central government and His Holiness Lama, they will refuse to negotiate seriously with Dharamsala. Because Beijing will feel no need to negotiate as long as it believes its right to rule Tibet is not internationally being questioned or challenged. So unless international pressure is put on China's government to end the occupation of Tibet and to respect the Tibetan people's right to self-determination, it's really unlikely that meaningful negotiations will take place, in my view. And I should mention, and we show this in the book, that governments actually have a legal obligation to help resolve the Sino-Tibetan conflict. But if they believe that Tibet was always a part of China in some way or other, then they won't act on that obligation. You're also asking whether it's important to highlight the historical independence of Tibet. I think it is important to highlight Tibet's independence because, firstly, because that is the truth. And the Chinese are pressuring you, Tibetans, and the rest of the world to accept that Tibet has always been a part of China and that you are just one of the minorities of China with no rights over your territory, no rights over your resources, and no rights to negotiate even a special status within the PRC. That you don't have these rights is a lie, but it will become generally accepted unless Tibetans and others speak up about it.
And talking about Tibetans' approach to resolving the issue of Tibet, the middleweight approach, what is your thought on it? Do you see any significance for continuing middleweight approach for resolving the cause of Tibet?
The middleweight approach, as I understand it, is the commitment to resolve the Sino-Tibetan conflict non-violently by means of dialogue and negotiations, with the objective of finding a mutually beneficial solution. In my opinion, the middleweight approach can only be successful if Tibetans are clear and firm on their rights, and if China understands that. And Tibetan rights are directly linked to Tibet's historical status, which is why I think it is so important to be clear about that. Now, if genuine autonomy within the PRC is the goal, then it is essential to articulate the Tibetans' right to a restoration of their independence firmly, to make sure that the framing of the negotiations is proper. Having said that, I personally don't believe that genuine autonomy is possible under China's present regime, given the way it's behaving in Tibet, in East Turkestan, and in Hong Kong. And that, I think, makes it even more important to safeguard the rights of the Tibetans.
Right. According to your experience and expertise and your many years of your work in conflict resolution, where do you see Tibetan movement, freedom movement standing at this period of time?
I think the Tibetan movement is less effective today than it was in the 1980s and 1990s. Outside Tibet, it has lost much of its focus, momentum, energy, and I think most of all, self-confidence. So the movement needs to regain all of these things, in my opinion. And of course, I hope that our book will help to revitalize and perhaps focus the movement and help in its international advocacy. But, you know, the younger generation of very talented Tibetans and their friends around the world have an enormous potential to reshape the movement and make it even more effective than it's been. But of course, an essential requirement is being well informed and using information effectively. So much of what happens today is about information and the use of information. And today we have incredible communication tools at our disposal. So the potential is enormous. Sometimes I think some Tibetans and Tibet supporters are discouraged, and some may even have lost hope. And in part, I think it is because the world is going through a very difficult time, which makes it very difficult to be optimistic. But think of it this way. The only certainty we have is that everything changes. All power relations change. Regimes rise and fall. Crises cause changes all the time. And what's important is to be fully ready and united to grasp each opportunity as it comes to make progress towards Tibetan freedom. Hardly anyone saw the monumental changes that came to the Soviet Union that made it possible for the Baltic states, for example, to regain their lost independence after half a century of occupation. No one predicted the economic crisis in Indonesia that resulted in East Timor's regaining its independence after 25 years of occupation. Nor the devastating tsunami that resulted in Indonesia granting Aceh real autonomy after 40 years of repression. I mean, these things really happen, but they only happen in your favor if the movement is united and effective in its pursuit of a clear goal, but also is fully organized and prepared to grab opportunities when they do arise.
Right, absolutely. So Tibetans should stand united and be ready for opportunities when they arise. Thank you so much, Professor Michael, for being with us, for your opinion, and for giving us an insight into Tibet 2020, Tibet Brief 2020. Thank you very much for your time.
Tibet Brief 2020, yes. Thank you so much.
So that was Michael van Walt on his recently released book, Tibet Brief 2020. See you in the next episode of In Conversation with Tibet TV. Thank you for watching.